Biden voters are wrong. Yes, the election was hijacked. They've been brainwashed through social media and deliberate falsification of information. Again, this kind of psyops thing going on in the dark underworld of the web, that they've lost the ability to reason, which means to look at hypotheses and to weigh them and look at evidence. It was Aristotle who said that the mark of an intellectual is the ability to hold a hypothesis and examine the evidence without having to give assent to it before you're convinced. That seems to have been lost. What happens is people go for selective evidence to back up their pre-existing position, and then they say, "Oh well, case proved." Now that's not what intellectuals or people that are trying to be properly philosophical do. No, we suspend judgment. You practice epoche, and you stop. Epoche means to pause. And it was later used by Piro of Elis, who learned it from the Jain monks in India, who taught him the protocols of the suspension of judgment, connected to their concept of enlightenment, which is to see things from all perspectives at once. To see things from all perspectives at once brings humility, because you can see things from everyone's perspective, and yet you give assent to none. The only really true truth is the enlightened view. Okay, so let's take another example. Let's talk about nuclear war. One of the most amazing, wonderful things that's happened recently is the activation of the Treaty for the Prevention of Nuclear War, the abolition of nuclear weapons, which has now been accepted by many nations, and the numbers growing all the time. What's wrong with nuclear war? Why should I be against that? Well, because it comes from this same stable of absolutism that I'm speaking against. To destroy another country's 50 leading cities with a targeted attack by a Trident submarine, launching multiple warheads, means that you're absolutely certain they're really evil and need to be wiped out to the point of millions of people. That's like an absolutism of the highest degree. And I don't agree with that attitude. I mean, for a start, it's against all the international body of information and law about the role of civilians in war. You don't have the right to kill civilians like that en masse. The Quran again and again and again makes this point. I mean, Muhammad, although he was quite a warlike chap, he knew the limits to that. He knew there's such a thing as chivalry and authentic nobility of fighting. Fight for a cause, fight with your sword straight, man to man, but don't threaten women and children. Don't even chop their trees down or poison their wells, So if Muhammad were alive today, bless his soul, he would be utterly appalled at the concept of nuclear war, which is why the Iranians, who have a claim to be the most proper descendants of Muhammad's message, have said, we will never have nuclear weapons. And for that, they've been vilified and castigated by the Western media, which lives in this space of mirror reversal of truth. The more they say they don't want nuclear weapons, the more the West threatens to attack them. I mean, it's shocking the kind of degree of mendacity that is operated on nuclear weapons. The good news is that Biden will hopefully re-sign that treaty and get a peace agreement with Iran back, and it has to start from the assumption they don't want nuclear weapons, and that I think is absolutely the case. And I think there should be convened a kind of conference of ethical leaders, spiritual leaders, religious leaders. Let's have it in Tehran. Let's have it in Tashkent, Nia. Let's have it in Kazakhstan or somewhere, and Iranians and Americans and Israelis and British and French, we can all go and discuss why nuclear weapons should be abolished. And my view is that all nations in the world, including those that have nuclear weapons, like the UK, like France, like Russia, like China, should all sign together simultaneously at that event, at its conclusion, an agreement to sign that treaty, the TPNW treaty, and to nuclear disarmament, complete, universal, and absolute. I mean, that's the only absolutism I profess, which is absolute peace and non-violence is absolutely the best path for humanity. You see, as long as those nuclear weapons remain, the statistical probability is they will go off one day by accident. I mean, if you read the Greenpeace book on the nuclear age, which I have next door, there have been so many accidents around nuclear materials, nuclear bomb production, nuclear facilities. Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, those are the biggest, but there have been loads of others that you won't have heard of. There was Fukushima for a start, you know. And this technology is not fail-safe. It will go off by accident. And if it does, you know, we're doomed as a planet. I think I mentioned before, but I'll say it again, there's a brilliant documentary, The Man Who Saved the World, about this, starring this amazing Russian colonel, Petkov, I think he's still alive, hello, who literally saved the world because of doubt and uncertainty. The point I'm making here about the importance of doubt is that it literally saved the world, and is continuing to. The story is very simple. He was the commanding officer of the Russian nuclear weapons monitoring station on duty, and the red warning lights flash up that Russia's under attack by a whole bunch of nuclear weapons targeting in on Moscow and elsewhere. And he was told, you know, the protocol says you've got like a couple of minutes to make the decision and then respond. And by rights, he should have pressed the launch back, you know, get them before they blow up all our sites code. And his second in command was badgering him to do this. And everyone was looking at him, you know, he was starting to sweat in this underground bunker where they were. Like, you know, shouldn't you launch, shouldn't you launch? And he just doubted. He knew that if he pressed that button or authorised the codes to be released and pressed the button, then the entire Russian nuclear arsenal would have been on course for London, you know, US, Washington, you name it. And that's it. That's the end of humanity. And he decided that he was going to take a risk. He was uncertain that the equipment hadn't failed. He thought, no, maybe those flashing lights are malfunctioning. And he tried to contact on the phone people who were watching, I think from some satellite space station or something, and were tracking missiles, you know, could get physical sighting of them. And they couldn't see anything. They couldn't actually see missiles flying. And they weren't showing up on the radar screen. And the warning lights were all flashing red. Yes, they've launched, they're coming in, they'll hit Moscow in 5 minutes. But his people out there in the field were saying, no, we can't see anything. And he decided that the doubt was such that he would stand down the response. And he did not authorise the launch codes to fire back. Had he done it, we would not be here having this conversation. I would not be alive. You would not be alive. So thank God, Mr. Petkov, Colonel Petkov, he had doubt, you see. Now, later that night, it wasn't over because it happened again twice. Again, the launch codes went ballistic, the red lights flashing, you know, nuclear missile attack. And again, there was the pressure. You've got to launch. This must be real this time. I think it happened once more. And again, he tried to see, is there any visual proof of this? And no, there wasn't. And he refused to authorise the refiring back. Anyway, it's a really brilliant documentary. Look for it on YouTube, The Man Who Saved the World. And it makes your hair stand up on it, because you realise how close we came to a catastrophic nuclear meltdown. The thing is, statistically, that will happen. I'm not, I don't have to be the next prophet to predict that scientifically that will happen in the next 100 or 200 years, unless we get rid of these things. There is no way with these kind of modern technological networks that are so complicated, there's no way to prevent a malfunction. So the moral implication of that is we have to get rid of the cause so that we don't have to rely on the Petkoffs making the right call next time, because they might not make the right call. So when I lived in Scotland, I took part in some peace demonstrations at the Faslane bases, where there's a peace camp, and those brave people are still there campaigning against Britain's nuclear weapons fleet. What the Scots are saying is they want their independence, and one of the reasons they want it is they don't want nuclear weapons on their soil. They don't want nuclear weapons full stop anywhere in the world. And an independent free Scotland will become a peace Scotland, and we'll get rid of these nuclear weapons from our shores, from the Clyde and from the lochs where I used to live, Loch Goyle and all the other lochs, Gairloch and so on. And I can't wait. It's really long overdue. I hope that the UK as a whole would do the right thing and move towards nuclear disarmament, but it's obvious the Westminster powers are so corrupt, so incompetent and so morally unintelligent, the kind of Theresa May, Boris Johnson types, they'll never in a million years be able to work out what I'm saying, or to work out morality from immorality. They haven't simply got the genes. I think Theresa May's got the potential to, and I'll come back to that at the end. I think of the two, she's slightly more intelligent and more moral, Her Latin may not be as good, but that might be a benefit. So, when I was living in Scotland, I took part in some of these peace demonstrations. I learned something rather chilling, which is that it was an academic from the University of Leeds, an expert in peace studies, talking to us, who said he'd been doing some research about Britain's nuclear submarine deterrence, nuclear deterrence. And apparently on these submarines floating around, there's always one or two of them at sea at any time. Each of them have missiles that have 50 separately targetable warheads. So you fire it from the submarine, and then it can, like a firework, it can burst into 50 separate rockets, which can all go and target different cities. So, you shoot the main missile up, then it fireworks, and it can land on 50 different cities in China or Russia or whatever. And that's what they do. That's their war plan. It's all written down. I mean, there are people in the MOD building who've thought this all through, and they've got operational plans right now as I'm talking. A nuclear submarine at sea has got that. Okay, so what happens? Right, it's like the Petkoff thing. So they're thousands of feet underwater. They don't know what's going on. They get a phone call, or I don't know how, an email, a sort of message. Britain under attack, London under attack, 10 minutes, danger. Launch retaliation immediately. Obviously a code comes through. And then your commander of the submarine fleet, of the submarine, has the Petkoff situation. How do I know that that's genuine? How do I know that I have to retaliate? What do I do? Because I know that once I press that button, half of Asia goes up in smoke, and they're not going to like that. They're going to fire back, immediately. And then that means the end of Britain, the end of Europe, the end of France, probably the end of America, And before you know it, 20 minutes later, it's all a smoking heap of dying, unbelievable horror. Because if you've seen the film of what happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the impact is not just the people that are killed instantly, vaporized. And each of these 50 separate warheads are much, much more powerful than Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. These are H bombs. These can obliterate Moscow or St. Petersburg or whatever. And then they radiate out their lethal dose for all the surrounding areas. So if you're not in the immediate kill zone, you get killed by the firestorm, you get killed by the radiation that comes out. And the same with us, London is evaporated, and the kill zone extends out to Maidenhead and High Wycombe, and so you've got and no way that the health services can cope. I mean, look at it with a pandemic. I mean, in a nuclear war, this is, I mean, that's why the doctors, when I was working at the University of London and worked with the British Medical Association, and some of the doctors, physicians for nuclear responsibility and so on, issued their absolute categorical blanket warning against nuclear madness, and that we had to end the nuclear arms race. That's why Gorbachev's physician and Reagan's physician made them talk to each other. This is a medical challenge facing humanity, because if there was ever a nuclear war, it's the worst ever it'd be the worst ever medical catastrophe to face humanity. Make the pandemic look like, a storm in a teacup. So, okay, back to the submarine. You're on the submarine, you're the British naval commander, you've been promoted, you've been to Eton, you've been to whatever, Dartmouth College, you're a top naval guy, and now it says you've got to fire back immediately. And you've got that ethical choice. Well, what happens at that point, apparently, is they go to the locked safe, they have the codes, they open the thing, and they get a letter signed by the Queen. Can you believe it? Right? And the Prime Minister. And the letter says, we hereby give you moral authority to launch the nuclear weapons. Signed Her Majesty and the Prime Minister. Now, and so because of that, this chap goes back and thinks, okay, well, they say it's all right, so I'll do it. And that's it. Humanity's gone up in smoke, right? There's no sort of Petkoff uncertainty because there's the letter telling you to do it. Well, I mean, now that's what I call absolutism. You see, I could never write a letter like that if I was a Prime Minister or a monarch. I could never give anyone authority to self-destruct the world, which is what that letter is doing. It's saying that you have the authority to now destroy the enemy, whatever that is, and in a mass totalitarian way that makes Hitler look like the head gardener. I mean, to obliterate 50 cities with hydrogen bombs is off the scale of unethical behaviour. And the fact that your defence is, well, they're doing it to us. Now, the theory is that that letter would never come out of the safe unless there'd already been an attack on the UK and on Britain. And it would only be done in self-defence. The thing is, attacking them is not going to prevent the obliteration of the UK. These missiles are not to shoot down their missiles. They're to launch a revenge attack against the enemy so that both sides get destroyed. Mutually assured destruction. So it doesn't actually say, it doesn't help anything. It just is like a revenge thing. It's like in the movies, the cowboy gets shot and with his last dying act, he shoots the guy that shot him. So what? You end up 2 people dead. The problem I have as a philosopher with all this is the moral absolutism implied in having a letter like that in the safe. That's why nuclear weapons are such a stupid idea, because how do we know? Well, firstly, how do we know it's not a false warning like the Petkoff thing? And there's no way the guy in the submarine deep down can know that or not. And the risk is that, and mathematicians can work this out, religious mathematicians get working on it. The probability is that sometime in the next 50 years, that will happen. The Petkov scenario, only the guy will press the button. And it could be a French lieutenant, it could be British, it could be Chinese, it could be American, it could be whatever. I hope it won't be Scottish, because I hope the Scots get out of this game. I think this is the call for Scotland's, we gave another chance to the UK, we gave another chance to the Westminster Whitehall elites in 2014. We let them have their let's keep the UK together and we promise to be really nice referendum, the smiley face of Cameron promising, apple pie and whatever, and Gordon Brown, yes, we're going to be a lovely country and we all love each other. Well, it hasn't worked. It's become a nasty, vicious, mendacious, lying, deceitful, incompetent and cruel country under Theresa May and Boris Johnson, who did their Brexit with absolutely no regard for ethics or reason, buttressed by the most vicious right-wing, ignorant press that any country has. I don't say these things lightly, and I don't say these things it's not that I'm not a patriot. I love Britain. I love Scotland, England, Wales, all of it, all over, Ireland. I love it to bits. It's because I love it that I'm saying these things. When your country goes rotten, you have to, tell the truth. As a philosopher of peace, and as the arch-druid of the peace druids of Britain and Europe, I have a duty, I have a sworn oath to tell the truth. That's why I want my politicians to do the same. So, the uncertainty that can save us is what should lead us to nuclear disarmament. If somebody made Boris Johnson listen to my talk and he got it, the penny dropped, and he said, yeah, I've been thinking about this. This is all a bit getting over the top, and now we're going to have a second referendum on Scotland. We're going to have no, I tell you what, we'll have a referendum about nuclear weapons. Do we really want them? They sound a bit dangerous. Maybe they're not such a good idea, I mean, the thing is, it's not going to happen, because these people are surrounded by a steel wall of ignorance, a steel wall of nincompoops and sycophants who won't let truth into the building. So I think I'm just saying, as an academic, I'm sworn to the oath of doubt. Ever since Pyrrho of Elis, ever since Cicero wrote about what an academic is, ever since the Jains first began to think through the strategies towards enlightenment. Enlightenment comes when you see all angles. Enlightenment comes when you see every perspective, and you realise truth is the invisible point of escape from contradictory opposites. That's what Hegel, in his own, complicated way, explained through his logic system. And it leads to epoché and academic doubt. There's a glimmer of hope that philosophers can. Well, our duty is to go on telling the truth and to try and working that out, and work with students and colleagues in academia worldwide to try and raise the general intelligence level of our so-called political elites that have adopted this creed of mendacity and viciousness and absolutism. There are good people around too, and you should vote for them. You should work out diligently with mathematical precision, who are the most virtuous, and vote for them. And the other lot, well, they need to go back to school, to be honest. I want to finish by just summing up a few things about my work this week on religious mathematics, which is going on. It's, as I've said, complicated, intense, but rewarding. And I've been working this week on topics of militarism, kind of what I'm talking about, really, and the absurdity of militarism, the numbers of trillions of dollars that are spent in the last few years on war and war fighting, particularly by America. And yet it's not brought them any security or any peace. it's all it's done is line the pockets of the great arms companies and their custodians. And what I proposed is this Nonagon project to put the second floor on top of the Pentagon to house the US Department of Peace. And I proposed a similar thing in London and in Moscow and in Beijing. Wherever there's a Ministry of War sapping up the money, sucking in the yen or the whatever from ordinary people, they're the ones paying for all this nuclear threat and the conventional war and chemical and probably biological weapons research that has led to the pandemic shutdown, which is why they're not telling us, because they know we'd be absolutely shocked, we the people. But the evidence is that it's probable that this coronavirus came from a bioweapons research institute, leaked somehow. I suspend judgment, I'm an academic, but that's what the evidence looks like. And we should at least test it by invoking the Bioweapons Treaty Convention, which I've said before, but, research it. So I've been working on militarism this week. I've discovered an amazing American woman that I'm totally in love with called Jeanette Rankin. I've never heard of her before. The reason I love studying and writing is you keep learning so much stuff. And Jeanette Rankin was a Republican woman back in the days when the Republican Party was a good party. It was Lincoln's party. And she was elected from Montana, a great part of the Midwest, which I know and love well. I love the Western Canada and the States. I lived and worked in Alberta, which is Western Canada, for 4 years in my youth. I've fallen asleep under Western skies, and I know that landscape. And Montana is just across the border. And Jeanette was raised in what you'd call a cowboy sort of environment, and she was a fierce campaigner for women's rights and the suffragette movement in America. And she was the first ever woman sent to Congress. And she went as a Republican from Montana. In 1910 she arrived in Congress, and she was dead against war. She had two big things. She wanted to promote the rights of women, and she wanted to stop wars. And people grumbled on both counts and attacked her viciously. And she said, no, peace is women's business. Because for her, and it's still true, war usually, it's fought by the men, but it's the women that suffer. Just imagine that scenario of an accidental nuclear war. Let's say Petkov hadn't had enough doubt and had sanctioned a retaliatory attack. The women would have suffered vastly in their homes, being incinerated and blown to pieces and vaporized, and their children, and out for 50-mile radius around each city. How can you keep faith with life if that threat is hovering over you? That's why my friend Professor John Somerville founded Philosophers Against Nuclear Omnicide, which I'm vice president of. The body continues. We're still working on this. How can we sit and go to bed at night and be happy that we could be 10 minutes away from nuclear omnicide? It's beyond unethical. It's demonic. I don't know what words we could use. John was a great man. I met him. He was an American philosopher on the left and a peace activist who founded Philosophers of Peace and the Prevention of Nuclear Homicide, which I'm vice president for. And my friend Glenn T. Martin, Professor Martin, is the president. And we are still campaigning to wake people up to these dangers. John Somerville was a friend of Einstein who supported his work as well. So that's militarism. Now, Jeanette felt very strongly about this. Peace is women's business. And she voted against American participation in World War I. Now, I wasn't alive then, but I've nursed people that were. I've nursed in Canada, in Alberta, Canadian Army soldiers who fought in the trenches in World War I, and they were still shell-shocked by the experience. I will never forget the Scottish Canadians who'd been drafted and sent off to the trenches. I was the last guy they told their secrets to, and they told me, Thomas, you have to stop wars. you have to stop World War III. That's your mission. And they said, leave Alberta, go back to London, and you know, do all you can to prevent World War III. And that's what I've been doing ever since. You know, I could have been a nursing or a doctor in Canada and had a very comfortable life, thank you. But I chose instead to come back to Europe to stop World War III. So, and then Jeanette Rankin was elected again as a congresswoman in 1940, can you get, from Montana. And again she went to the US Congress, and she was the only person to vote against American participation in World War II. She said, look, I don't care the politics, I don't care the rhetoric, we should not be fighting wars. She was a peace activist through and through, like me. And like my mother, she reminds me totally of my mother, Eileen Daffern, who had two passions in life. One was preventing nuclear war, and the other was enfranchising and supporting women's advancement in society, and that's why she worked as a teacher. I suppose she had another passion, which was European culture, French, Greek. She loved Europe, Italian. She took us as a family to France every year, which is why I speak French and love France and why I've ended up here. And she went to visit Greece every year for 20 years on holiday to mostly Crete. So she was a Europhile, as am I. And I don't know if my mother had ever heard of Jeanette Rankin, but she would have loved her. And that to me is a proper Republican. You know, the Trump and his entourage, they are demonic. They're just ignorant. They're like Boris Johnson and to the Tory party. They're not the actual substance. They're fake. Ersatz, we call it in German. The other topic I've been looking at for religious maths this week, very interesting, is anthropology. I'm very interested in anthropology, obviously. To study war and violence and how to prevent it, you have to understand anthropology. What is it in human nature that does this stuff? There's a huge debate in anthropology, and I studied it in Canada when in my spare time, when I wasn't working full-time. Well, I was working full-time, but I had free time. I went and did a course in anthropology at the University of Calgary, and I loved it. The lecturer brought in a bunch of bones and said, these are real bones of early ancestors, and all the number of total bones are not that many. They would fill, just like this room, if they're all jumbled in together. And from those fragments, we've tried to recreate the hominid family tree, the human line, the Homo sapiens line, when we diverged from the others like Ramapithecus, Neanderthal, etc. And I was hooked. I've been interested in anthropology ever since, and there's so much that's not known. Now, one of the things that's not known, and which I've been working on, is there are two schools of thought in anthropology, and this is to simplify, forgive me. There's the Hobbesian, life is nasty, brutish and short anthropology, which says that we evolved from a chimpanzee-like creature, a little hominid creature that was very aggressive, very prone to violence, very sexually jealous, very possessive, would go around with big sticks and bash any other male. This is male violence, right? And that was really, fighting over control of the females and the food supply. And, there were little Napoleons roaming around, bashing every other male on the head. And it was war from then on. And that this violent streak in our ancestors led to us being like this now. So that, the guy who finally presses that button on the nuclear submarine, well, he's just doing what his ancestors have been doing all along. He's just got bigger sticks now. And so there's nothing you can really do about it. You can't change human nature. That was always the slogan when I was involved in debating societies at Brighton College. I was always the Labour guy and